It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Priya Sircar. Priya is the founder of Road Openers LLC, whose mission is to help people and ideas achieve their full potential by connecting them to collaborators, resources, and creative energy. She previously served as Director of Arts at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and then as the City of Charlotte's inaugural Arts and Culture Officer. She is a dancer, choreographer, poet, and filmmaker. Joining Priya on stage after her remarks for Q&A will be David Daley Arrington, a Grammy-nominated producer, leadership coach, and creative entrepreneur. He is the owner of Bridge Building Consulting, co-owner of Hugh House Creative Agency, and host of the Bridge Builder Conversations podcast. Please join me in welcoming Priya to the stage.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So good. I love it. Thank you all for being here. It's great to be with you. Thank you to the Charlotte Center for inviting me for tonight's conversation and also for the opportunity to share our short film. It was a true family collaboration. My mom and my daughter, Leica, is here, appear in the film. And my husband, Arvin Dodson, filmed and edited it. And I conceived and directed it, and it's my directorial debut. And the song featured in the film, Valley, is by Avram's cousin's band, Pelvis Wrestling. And it's been a real pleasure to experience the film with audiences this past year at film festivals and screenings like this one. For the last few years, I've been reflecting on people who've opened doors for me by stepping outside of their comfort zone or simply illustrating for me a possibility that I could then envision for myself. One of my earliest memories is of me clasping a blue racquetball in the home of Shirley Counts, a highly recommended piano teacher who taught students ages 6 and up. I was 5. And she agreed to meet with my mother and me to gauge whether I was ready to begin lessons. Now, my parents had always planned for me to study music. While I was still in the womb, they read the book, How to Choose the Right Instrument for Your Child. And they enrolled me in early childhood music classes when I was 3. So this interview was about figuring out whether, the blue ball was about gauging my grip, the strength in my little fingers. And there were probably other criteria, but the blue ball is what I remember. Whatever those other criteria were, Mrs. Counts accepted me, and I studied with her right through high school. A few years later in junior high, after taking a few years of tap and jazz and ballet classes, I auditioned for the dance company at my performing arts school, encouraged by my teacher, Marianne Allen, a talented and vivacious woman. Now, I was 13 years old, and I hadn't had much formal training yet. So I was nervous, but I loved dance. And so I summoned some courage and went to the audition. Nervousness soon turned to terror. Everyone else was far older than I was and had a lot more experience. And they were doing moves I couldn't even name. So I just gave it my all and resisted the urge to run out of the studio and left feeling as dejected as I recall ever feeling. A few weeks later, at the spring recital, I was with my family. We were celebrating in the lobby, along with the other families, among lots of bouquets and hugging and smiling. And Marianne said to me, "Have you looked at the audition results?" And I said, "No, I blocked that fiasco out of my mind." And she said, "Come take a look. You probably figure where this is going. My name was not on the list of members. Under that list was a new category, junior member, and there is my name." The point of this story is not that I made the dance company. It's that, like Mrs. Counts, Marianne had veered from the norm and created an opportunity for me to grow. And I did. I kept dancing. I started choreographing the following year, and I haven't stopped since. It's been 33 years. When Mark and I started talking several months ago, he asked me, "Is Charlotte as creative as we think we are? And if not, what's holding us back?" And I said without hesitation, "Fear." My experiences in Charlotte's arts and culture scene indicate that we have no shortage of artistic creativity. I agree with you, Lindsay. The depth, breadth, diversity, artistry, and sheer scrappiness bowled me over on my first visit over 6 years ago and still impress me to this day. Where we lack imagination, and, just as importantly, chutzpah, is how we support that creativity. Arts and culture support in Charlotte-Mecklenburg has been in a period of acute transition for the last few years. I call it acute because it's actually been transitioning for quite some time, and I'll offer a macro view. In my arts administration graduate program 15 years ago in New York, we were studying major shifts in arts and culture governance and funding around the US, including in workplace giving, which is a major factor in United Arts funds like Charlotte's. And at that time, Charlotte-Mecklenburg was presented to us as the case study in organizational and systemic upheaval. Then, in 2015-2016, while facilitating a cultural plan for the greater Louisville, Kentucky area for the Fund for the Arts, which is one of the two oldest United Arts funds in the US, I interviewed then president of the Arts and Science Council, the late Robert Bush, about the challenges that the ASC was navigating in a time of great change. So Charlotte's struggles were widely known across the country. Eventually, the pandemic catapulted us into this acute transition. I witnessed it from mid-range while with the Knight Foundation, and then became part of that transition when I moved to Charlotte and assumed the newly created role of Arts and Culture Officer with the City of Charlotte. I was tasked with leading the newly established Infusion Fund and working with the new Arts and Culture Advisory Board to distribute funding and develop a comprehensive plan for our arts and culture sector. We have some volunteer members of that board here tonight. Thank you for serving. Now, in naming fear, I'm not suggesting that no one in Charlotte or Mecklenburg County has ever taken a chance on something big and made a big bet. In fact, certainly civic leaders have done that and made far bigger bets than the $38 million infusion fund. And artists take chances all the time when creating work, when applying for grants. But I found that taking artistic risks is different from challenging established systems, structures, and identities. Rather, it's a mindset that pervades our systems. It's the culture. The fear I see manifests in a few ways. First, fear of losing control. It's no secret that Charlotte is known as a place where the few make decisions for the many, often behind closed doors. I was told this by several people when I first began working in Charlotte, and gained insight when I moved here and started to get to know the city and the arts and culture community. I learned it even had a name. Perhaps you've heard of it, the Charlotte Way. Perhaps it's unsurprising that if you're a person who's enjoyed control, not only over your own life, but over the lives of others, you might fear losing that control. You've enjoyed self-determination, power, influence, and less obvious, but just as compelling, relevance. Furthermore, if you've limited access to control to yourself and a select few, you might worry what might happen when others who haven't had access to such control have some of it. What if you shared that control, or even let it go? Second, fear of uncertainty and potential failure. I've witnessed this in all corners of our community. Funders, policymakers, individual artists, organizations, small, medium, and large, all have questioned and expressed concerns about a range of experiments, including the Infusion Fund, a then untested form of governance and funding distribution, and about new mechanisms to increase access to funding, like an open call for unrestricted grants and the Rapid Response Opportunity Fund. We didn't know exactly how the latter two would play out, but fortunately, they distributed approximately $3 million in about 2 years to over 150 individual artists and groups, many of whom had never had access to that type of funding before. So perhaps there is a third type of fear, fear of success. What if it works? That would turn on its head everything we've been told about how things work in Charlotte. I've heard these phrases repeatedly since moving here, and perhaps you've heard some of them too. That'll never work in Charlotte. They don't understand how things work in Charlotte. In Charlotte, we typically feel like, this has been working, why change it? In my experience, this practice has ranged from naysaying to outright intimidation. One influential funder told me privately, well, you'll be the arts and culture officer who let X organization die. The same person recommended in a public advisory meeting that we withhold grantees' next payment if they didn't provide some requested data that was outside our normal reporting schedule. It came from the grassroots too. At one point, there was so much ire directed at our elected officials, stoked to a fervor through social media mis and disinformation, such that you could almost see the proverbial pitchforks, that one official shared with me that they'd had extra police presence posted in front of their home to protect their family. Is this the kind of place we want to be? Fueled by threats instead of empathy and respect? For whom has this been working? And for whom has it not? I'm not the only one asking these questions or advocating that we unite for the greater good. There have been voices in our arts and culture sector and other disciplines who've been working for years, decades. But there haven't been enough. They haven't been very loud. Some of those voices insist that they alone should hold the megaphone. The Charlotte Arts and Culture Plan was shaped by over 3,400 people from 75 zip codes and written by about 70 civic leaders from across sectors and disciplines. The vision that emerged is of a community where all people value, support, and thrive through arts and culture and creativity. The plan proposes a governance model unique in the nation to sustain our sector over the next 10 years, a collaborative, distributed leadership model that makes the most of our existing entities while enabling ongoing, meaningful community participation. Last year, with David Butler, a co-founder of Hugh House, I had the opportunity, and who served on the steering committee for the plan, I had a chance to share this work at the annual conference of Grantmakers in the Arts, a gathering of foundations, government agencies, and art service organizations from around the country. The proposed model was met with great interest. I noticed one person photographing the slide that shows the model, which, by the way, is available on page 53 of the plan, which is on the city's website. Check it out if you don't already have it. However, following the plan's acceptance by City Council in November 2023, an alternative proposition took root. It was developed via private conversations, among a few, without community input. It is centralized, top-down, and non-participatory. A key selling point to leaders was that it would be up and running faster than this strange recommended model. And while it is being implemented, it has run into some hiccups along the way to be fully realized. Presently, these fears are costing us several things. Transparency that was fostered with great care during the cultural planning process. Trust earned diligently through planning and grant-making activities. Momentum from planning and early implementation. Currently, we have grant programs in limbo and $2 million of city funding held up despite City Council's approval last June of a method for distribution and participation in decision-making by our arts and culture sector. These are not features of the centralized structure that's being substituted for the consortium model that could have been in place last summer. Let's ask ourselves, is a certainty that limits us really better than an uncertainty that could lead to abundance? I'll paraphrase a recent interview with one of my mentors, the poet, professor, and futurist Betty Sue Flowers, who led the LBJ Presidential Library and consults as a global scenario planner for organizations like Royal Dutch Shell and General Motors, and who worked with journalist Bill Moyers and mythologist Joseph Campbell on the PBS series, The Power of Myth. She's asked about the following phenomenon. If I present a scenario of the future that is not consistent with your past narrative or today, everyone around me will do everything they can to prevent me from living that scenario. Betty Sue interjects, that is true in every field. When asked why, she explains, change requires more of us than more of the same. We are geared evolutionarily to conserve energy. Something new is inherently a big energy suck. And it sets hierarchies. So hierarchies want to keep themselves hierarchical. And any change is also a big threat to power and to efficiency and economy and the way things are and to who's admired. When asked which is more effective, top-down or bottom-up change, Betty Sue proposes a third way. From the bottom up, but in a safe container created by the top. The top creates a container in which it's okay to think outside of the box, and then can, with the connivance of the bottom up, make change. It's an iterative process of dialogue. For a brief time, we had that kind of container, the Infusion Fund. We also had iterative dialogue through the cultural planning conversations. The plan recommends a next generation kind of container for out-of-the-box thinking and doing. And tonight, we're picking back up the conversation. So, where do we go from here? To transform, we need to synthesize and synergize. To synthesize, we need to think expansively about how we nurture arts and culture, looking inward, and re-examining our individual, organizational, and communal needs, strengths, and resources, and looking outward, beyond the borders of Charlotte and Mecklenburg, regionally, nationally, maybe even internationally, and outside of arts and culture. As we identify a greater range of internal and external assets, and I don't mean this transactionally, I mean in terms of our human capacity and talent and underutilized resources and unforeseen opportunities, we must synthesize these to achieve not only individual goals, but community-generated shared goals. Second, to synergize, we must organize ourselves and act consistently with our values in pursuit of a greater inclusive good, and not be bound by the mythology of the Charlotte way. And when I say myth, I don't mean it's not real, it's very real. I mean it the way that Campbell and Flowers sees it, the stories that we tell each other and ourselves. The old ways persist because we allow them to. When we spend our energy protecting our own little plots of land, we miss out on the opportunity to cultivate a vast community garden in which we all can flourish. To mix metaphors and borrow from the great and unfortunately late artist David Lynch, we must keep our eye on the donut, not the hole. We started this segment with an experimental short film, and I'll close with a clip from a Hollywood blockbuster. Roll clip, please.
Once upon a time, there was a beautiful tiger. She lived in a cave with the rest of her family. Her father and mother told her, "You may go anywhere you want, but never go near the cliff, for you could fall
and die." Good story.
But when no one was looking, she'd go near the cliff. For the closer she came to the edge, the more she could hear, the more she could see, the more she could feel. Finally, she stood at the very edge. She saw a light. She leaned out to touch it. Then she slipped.
And she fell.
And she flew.
Wow. Where did she fly?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
A place with more suns in the sky than you can count.
It would be so bright.
A place not like today or yesterday. A place where things are better.
Oh.
I see it tomorrow, where we're nurturing our collective success, not from the shadows, but in the sunlight. And we're all thriving together. I think many of you can see it too. So what do you say? Shall we take that step together? We may fly. Thank you.
Love it.
Yeah, are you a fan of Roots?
No,
It's really good.
but I do love the clip. And I love, again, everything you just shared. I'm a conversationalist, so yes, you sent me everything you're going to say. I breezed through it because I wanted to hear you say it. I know time is limited, so with that in mind, I also do like to be very present. Towards the end of your sharing, you got a little emotional. Why? What's that?
A, I'm a softie. B, because David Lynch just died. Probably those reasons. Yeah. I mean, and maybe C, it's like, I mean, you can tell, but I'm very passionate about this topic. And I'll leave it there for now. Okay. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I asked you this before anyone was in this room about your scar, and you shared a bit about its tie-in into the abundance idea that you shared a few minutes ago. Do you mind expanding on that?
Yeah,
before?
thanks. Well, so my mom brought me this scarf, and it's from India. I didn't share that, but what I shared was that I chose it intentionally, not only because green's my favorite color, but because it shows vegetation and a lot of flowers and plants. And that is an image, an analogy of a very lush, diverse garden that I have been picturing and seeking and working with many of you to cultivate. I think cultivation is a word I use a lot. Also, gardening was sort of our pandemic hobby. More my husband than me. But yeah, so I just, I feel like, as I shared with you, abundance and being motivated by and seeking abundance together is a core message for me tonight.
Thank you for that. So it is great to see a lot of familiar faces in the room, but also a lot of new faces of friends to be, from artists to those who lead within our arts organizations, to even those who lead within our funding institutions within the city. So definitely excited about not just what you share, but also this quick dialogue, as well as we'll have time for a couple of questions from you all. But I'd like to, again, engage, so if we could quickly, I'm interested. Are there a few people who are brave enough to choose a word that is sitting with you after hearing what Priya just shared? One word. Go for it. Speak up. Hope. Okay.
Frustration.
Frustration.
Dollars.
Dollars. Inequity. Go for it.
Risk.
Risk. Donut. Hey.
Politics.
Activate.
Politics.
Politics.
Chutzpah.
Chutzpah. We have a small hand in the front row. Fear. Go for it.
Yeah.
The edge. Okay. Yes, sir. Chance. Good stuff. Good stuff. Love it. Love it. Just want to get a pulse on the room. So, first question that I would like to ask you. During your transition from being a relative outsider to becoming deeply embedded in Charlotte's arts and culture ecosystem, what was one surprising or eye-opening learning about this community, and how has it influenced your approach?
Thank you. I was like, yeah, I was supposed to mull that over, wasn't I?
Pick one. Pick
Yeah.
one.
There are so many, and I shared, I shared some of those aha things in the remarks, but a couple of things. One, this was my first time working inside government. I had worked with government before and had clients with my past consulting. I just worked with them and for them. It was really a wonderful educational experience and opportunity to serve from within our local government and to see how many passionate people are working in the trenches every day and witnessed that up close. And also, I learned about Charlotte, how, in my view, the private sector drives the public sector. And I had a bit of an inkling when I was with my foundation. It was like starting to work here, but I saw it up close
Sure.
when I got here. And you asked me a second part, how does that influence
Yes.
my work?
That aha.
Yeah.
How did that impact how you went about your work?
So I guess I want to be clear that I don't think the private sector is a bad thing. I mean, I think really for us to thrive, we all have a role to play. And there's a lot of aspects to the private sector. There's small, medium, and large businesses. There's corporations. There's entrepreneurs, right? And there's also the public sector. And I think it really is important for them to work together and they complement each other. In fact, the public sector, government is so important because only the government has a mandate to serve all of us. And the private sector doesn't have that, even though we have many well-intentioned folks in the private sector and actors in the private sector, but they just don't have the mandate that government has. And government is the only one that has to serve the powerless, the penniless, and the voiceless. So they're all important. I think where I have a discomfort is what I see as the private sector driving the public, and I feel like there should be more of a balance.
Okay, thank you. So you've also spoken about fear. Kudos to your daughter, she's paying attention. As a key barrier to creativity and innovation in Charlotte. Can you share examples of moments where you've seen this fear challenged or overcome in meaningful ways, and what we might learn from them?
Yeah, thank you. So I have been able to witness this fear being overcome. And I guess I say fear, I mean, maybe the folks weren't fearful when they were acting, but up close in our advisory board meetings and in our steering committee meetings, there have been brave voices who speak up and advocate for values that are maybe not the ones that are kind of held up at the highest level of our institutions and status quo. And I've also seen backlash happen either within those conversations or after. There are awesome brave people in this room right now who have been those brave voices and have experienced backlash. And I think we can learn, I feel like it's important to have more voices. I referenced that in my remarks, that I feel like there aren't enough of them and they're not loud enough. And I know from personal experience myself, as well as watching these brave folks, that it's hard to be the only voice or one of a couple or three, especially when people around you that you know share your values choose to remain silent. People have to speak out more so that there's a chorus.
Gotcha. So really quickly, I would love, in addition to, again, using your voice, are there any examples of someone on the ground or an organization on the ground who has actively pushed back against that? Is there any examples that you have during your time here that illustrate that?
Yeah, I know we talked about this, and I guess what as I shared with Davey, as I shared with you, I feel like they're really amazing examples of organizations who are doing the work anyway, and the work is artistic work. It is work that is service work, so serving the arts and culture community. There are folks sitting here in this room who are doing that work. And so and it's also in the DNA of creatives, I feel like, to just bootstrap it, right? Like, we're just gonna get it done. We may not have the resources support, but we'll find a way, which is very admirable. But we shouldn't have to bootstrap it, what if we didn't have to, right? Then imagine how great these could be. So one thing that, as I shared with you earlier, is that I do feel there's a bit of a difference with kind of charging forward and on the artistic front and actually pushing back against status quo or against, in terms of a more like logistical power dynamics, those kinds of things. Both are needed, but they're not exactly. To me,
Have
they're
you
not.
not seen the latter? Is that what you're saying? It sounds like it's
Nothing readily comes to mind.
okay. It's an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. So, final question before I open it up for a couple of questions. You highlighted the shift from survival to thriving as a critical challenge for the Charlotte arts and culture community. What challenge or encouragement would you give the practicing artist, the arts organization leader, and the funding leader who desire to play a role in transforming the arts and culture community for the better? And before you answer that, I would like to just paint the picture of, in reality, culture. We all contribute to it, regardless of our title or role. We all play a part in the culture in which we call Charlotte, and it is ours. Whether we want to be like, that's not arm's length what you play a part even in that action. So I think, to my question, is very much a collective question as a community, as we all contribute, but also very specific to, again, the artists, the arts organization leader, as well as someone in the funding space. How would you encourage or challenge them in being part of that transformation?
Thank you. Yeah. I really appreciate the framing of it with the culture and the roles that each and every one of us plays. As we talked about this leading up to today too, I've shared the feeling that culture, what is culture? Culture is actually a collection of individual thoughts and ideas and behaviors. And it's not even just individual daily thoughts, actions, and behavior in mind. It's a series of thoughts and actions, behaviors over time. All the things that you do and all the things that I do, all the things that every single one of us does in succession create the culture. So earlier when I referenced that we need to act in accordance with our values, alignment, it's because I feel like, I have seen people stand up here and there in places. But at times it has felt to me like out of necessity, people are choosing their battles. And that's an age-old wisdom that a lot of us know. Sometimes you do have to choose your battles. But if we're all choosing separate battles, we're not fighting the same one together, or let's kind of call it a battle, let's call it a journey, a journey of evolution. How are we going to move forward together? And so unless we're, from one time to the next, each instance to the next, acting in accordance with those values, then we won't be able to make the progress. So I think in line with that, my encouragement and invitation would be to think and act from a place of abundance. And you may say, and I have heard, and I get it, that, but there's only limited resources, limited funding, limited this, limited that. And in some sense that's true. But the other thing is, I do think there's some value to put it flippantly, fake it till you make it, or to put it more positively, practice makes progress. It's kind of like, I just started again a healthful eating regimen and a stringent workout regimen. And my heart is not in it, really, to be honest. But I'm just gonna do it, I'm just gonna show up to the gym. I'm gonna do the exercises I don't want, even burpees. And I'm going to eat the healthful things that my husband encourages me to eat because he's better at this. But I think after a few weeks of doing that, it's gonna come naturally. And I'm gonna be comfortable doing it. And I think that if we start to act from a place of we actually can thrive together and not have to compete with each other constantly, and we can create resources for the collective, we'll find ways to do it. And that's true if you're an artist, or you're leading an organization, you're working in an organization, or you're a funder. Let's just act like there's more. And we'll find more. We're already finding more. There are folks in this room looking at you, Wendy, I know, who are looking internationally for literally space, to display our artists' work in other countries. With the advisory board, we were able to bring Ford Foundation money to a Charlotte organization. Ford is one of the largest arts and culture funders in the country. Charlotte wasn't on their map. We put them on their map. So it can happen. We need to do more.
Appreciate that. Again, I love the abundance, the optimism, the opportunity in where we currently sit. And I even like the way you talk about culture. It's not just a decision you make one time. It's the continued decisions that we make over time to create the culture that we live in. The bridge builder in me wants to, I guess, kind of reframe what I'm hearing you say, and even as a challenge to us all, is thinking about where do we exist, whether it's the boardroom, whether it's behind a canvas, wherever you may exist. How might you intentionally connect with someone who exists in a different space tonight and have non-judgmental, curious conversations with them? How might that actually, I would say, ignite curiosity and innovation in you? Because again, if you don't know, you just don't know. But giving the opportunity not just to someone else, but to yourself might be the beginning of doing exactly what you're saying. Thinking about what is the abundance that exists that I'm just ignorant to because I don't know. And I only exist in this one pocket. So the bridge builder, we wanted to add that to what you just said, but I very much appreciate it. Lovely, lovely. So we want to take a couple of questions. We have a quick hand. I have to call on you. She was waiting. So if you can speak loud enough for everyone to hear you.
I have a degree in theater. So, Priya, you and I have had this conversation. I'm just curious, in this whole talk, you've talked about your impressions of the creativity. And yes, I agree, it's here. You've talked a lot about institutions, government, business. I think one of our major Achilles heel is individual patronage. And I'm just curious if you have any observations on what I perceive as an Achilles heel, individual patronage.
Yeah, thank you, Marcy. Marcy, I don't know if you know, I've been quoting you for like 3 years on not specifically. I don't know if it's this one or that.
Point in my heart.
Yeah. But about conversations on risk and anyway. But yes, so I agree with you. We could do better on individual patronage. You mentioned patronage. I know one of the things we've talked about specifically within that is, and I don't know if this is where, so let me know if this is not what you mean. I know we've talked about individual giving specifically to our nonprofit sector, but also supporting artists and others. So that gets back to the culture, right? And we talked a little bit about this. I used it as, I think working out is like on my mind right now because it's such a thing of fun. But we talked about how, I think we get stuck in our muscle memory. That's just natural, and in our muscle memory in Charlotte is public-private partnerships. It's raising large sums of money through a few institutions that are good at it, right? And we kind of get used to those things that we're good at, we feel like we're good at. And so we get stuck in a rut of that. And what happens is we have these other weaknesses that we're not paid attention to. And so then when it's time to use them, we're not so good at it. And for my analogy was like, it's leg day. Why? I love leg day. At the gym, I've got strong legs. When I work out my legs, they get big and strong fast. I feel like I'm really accomplishing a lot. I don't like working out my upper body because it's weak. But I got to, because if I don't, I'm not going to be strong overall. And if I do work it out, I'll be stronger, I'll be healthier, and I will be more resistant to injury. So we need to devote attention to some of those weak areas. And I agree that individual giving is one of them. The thing is, we've had some structural challenges to that because of the way for decades that Charlotte has done things, which is kind of rely on those few institutions and sectors to raise the money. And so in some sense, I don't fault our individual donors for not being used to giving or giving very much. Even in our advisory board meetings, we had folks of means talking about how there's not that much money in Charlotte. I know one of our comparable cities that came up in our research for the arts and culture plan, they were saying, well, that other city, don't compare us because we don't have that much money. It's like, we have a lot of money in Charlotte. And even if you don't have a lot of money, that practice of supporting what you care about can still be cultivated. And I think too, we haven't, because that wasn't already happening, I think we kind of, this is just again, my personal take, is I think we kind of missed the boat on the way that giving practices have changed generationally. So, and many of you might be familiar with this, is like, younger folks now, younger than myself, even, more of it, they prefer to give directly, right, to causes that they really care about. I think there's nothing wrong with that. That is not how this community was trained, right? So now we're kind of behind the curveball, I think, when it comes to catching up to present day giving attitudes and behaviors. Sure,
Cool. One more, Mark. We have time for more than one? One more than time out. All right. How about I give this young man who's new to the city and very interested in your question?
Right. I didn't do theater college. So first of all, thank you for the talk. My name is Anand Simon. Yeah. So my question is around abundance. The thing that we're talking about. You spoke about abundance, you spoke about fear, also about speaking up and using your voice. So it's common to see people acting out of that scarcity mindset, even when they're surrounded by opportunities. So my question for you is, what are some ways that we can get ourselves into a mindset of abundance? What are some ways that you have as well, so that we can start to create even when we don't have service?
Thank you. Did you feed it that? Because you asked me something like that. I'm not kidding. Thank you. So what are some ways we can do that? Well, one thing that I think is really important, one is looking out. Okay. Thank you. One thing that I think is important, we talked about this a moment ago, is looking outside of Charlotte and Mecklenburg as well. It's not that we don't have things here, but I do feel, I found even when I first started coming here, when I was in a previous role with Knight Foundation, that there was a lot of sort of looking inward for our resources. We should evaluate, what do we have? What are our strengths? What are things we could do? What might we be interested in? But I think there's great value in broadening our perspective and looking at other places and partners elsewhere and just ways that things are done elsewhere, and not just to learn, but to actually make connections, like you talked about, actually connecting with people and organizations and ideas that are in other places to broaden our perspective. And out of that, there might come more opportunities for not just funding, which we've talked about, like grants and other types of things. Patrons, expanding our patronage. Again, I'm looking back at you, Wendy, because you were big earlier, but And also expanding even venues, places to take our work. There's some amazing work being created here. And I have noticed that it's not necessarily traveling outside Charlotte that much, I see productions and I'm like, are you guys touring this? This needs to be toured around so other people elsewhere can see it. And as other eyes are put on the great work that originates here, which doesn't get enough attention, the work that's originated here and developed here, then that could lead to more opportunities. And that gets to kind of what I mentioned in my remarks about unforeseen opportunities. We need to, I think, open ourselves up to possibilities we can't envision right now. If we just limit ourselves to the things that we can kind of dream up in the moment, which is a lot for artists and creatives, I think it's about putting ourselves in positions where other things are sparked that we can't foresee, and then letting ourselves to be open to that. And part of what I'm doing now, you asked, like, what am I doing now? I'm trying, even my sort of centering myself mantra for tonight. I just did a little meditation and I breathed in. These are some things that have to do with my new social venture, Road Openers, which Meg mentioned earlier. And I breathed in open hand and I breathed out open heart, open hand and open heart. And I feel like it's an orientation that can allow us to come up with those opportunities.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Charlotte.